Hey there, authors. This is Todd from Bard Press, and today I want to talk about what I believe is one of the most important parts of the process of writing and publishing a book. And that piece of the process I want to talk about today is gathering feedback. Feedback is incredibly important in the creation of a book. It's very difficult, certainly for authors who have written hundreds of pages of material, for them to objectively know whether or not they're hitting the mark or they need to make changes. And there's lots of ways that we can bring people into the process of giving us feedback. So what I want to do is I want to tell you about an experiment that you may have heard of before that influences how I bring feedback into sort of the publishing process. There was a researcher by the name of Richard Schooler who set up an experiment that had 5 different kinds of jam. And he started by asking experts which was the best, which was the worst. And they ranked them in that order. And then what they did is they had people like you and me come in afterwards and try to rank those same jams in order of quality. So for the first set of people, all they did was they had them taste them and figure out what order they should be in from best to worst. And what was interesting about that first set of people was that their rankings of best to worst matched the experts' rankings almost perfectly. For the second set of folks, though, what they did is they asked people not only to rank the order, but to also tell the researchers why they were ranking them in the order that they did. And it turns out that when you ask for that next piece of information where someone has to think differently about the choice that they're making, that a completely different thought process is kind of brought in. And in the case of this experiment, what they found was the rankings for the next set of people didn't match up in any way to either the normal people who had ranked them or the experts. So what I do is when I bring feedback into the process, I think really hard about who is bringing that feedback as much as what kind of feedback I'm looking for. So there's a whole group of people who you might consider as general readers for your book, people who would read it, enjoy it, be enriched by it. For those sorts of folks, what I do is I ask very simple questions. Did you like the book? Did you not like the book? And that's keeping that decision-making sort of choosing process at a very consistent level, sort of like what we found in that experiment with having to rank the jams. And what I do is, based on how much they like the book, usually I'll follow up with just one question afterwards. So for people who really like the book, I'll ask them, gosh, how would you describe the book to someone else? Again, it takes that feedback and the way they're thinking about it and lets them translate it in a way that I think is really positive. And I a lot of times use that feedback to influence title, subtitle. Sometimes I'll change the book description based on the language that they're using or the kinds of ideas that they're emphasizing. For someone who was kind of neutral on the book, what I would do is I would ask them just what's one thing we could improve. And most people, if they're going to give kind of something as a kind of a neutral ranking, they can usually tell you almost immediately what's the one thing that wasn't working for them in the book. So getting that information from them can be incredibly valuable. For people who didn't like the book at all, what I asked them is, what's one thing we could have done better? You know, in most cases, for people who you completely missed the mark, you don't need a laundry list of things that weren't working, but to ask them, what's the one thing? Because usually, again, it's that what's the strong emotional point or piece that didn't work for them as they were doing the book. Now, what I often tell people is that is really great feedback to get from those readers, that general feedback that you can kind of get a thumbs up or thumbs down in terms of the work you're doing and the work that you're creating. What I often tell people is if you want to get to that next point of finding out why it's not working or what things you need to change, a lot of times you need an expert. You need people who've worked on books or worked on writing before, people who, are maybe even stronger experts in the field, either equivalent to you or maybe even stronger. I know a publisher who does peer research or a peer review for their books before they publish them. Again, trying to find someone whose expertise matches the author's so that the feedback that they give can be valuable and also not skewed by maybe not having the knowledge necessary to be able to make that assessment. So think really hard when you're gathering feedback at various phases along the way as you're creating your book, and who it is that you're asking and what kinds of questions you're asking them to get the most value out of that feedback.